biggest thing when it comes to signing players. It's how good are they, how valuable are they, and then how much are they worth, right? So you've come up with some salary projections or contract projections. How do we go about that entire process? What goes into that process for you?
Yeah, so first you just analyze the market, from a 30,000-foot view. Just how many teams have a need for this position. Something I learned later also is you got to look in the draft, not the full draft, but maybe the top 50 or top 100. How many good players at each position are there going to be? Because sometimes teams will say, yeah, we could pay a guy, or we think this guy could be an impact player right away. And then from there, it's stats first. So you're going to break it down from comparable players, looking at based on position. Let's say it's an edge rusher, looking at their pressures, their win percentage, their defensive stops, stuff like that. And then when you find comparable players, generally you want to look same age, same contractual situation. So are they a free agent, or they have 1 year left, so it's an extension, or whatever. And then you start looking at their old contracts, of course. And then lastly, you adjust, which we'll get into. You adjust for cap inflation, stuff like that. So the markets are going to grow. The position markets are generally going to grow kind of, in continuity with the salary cap. Obviously this year, that'll be interesting to see how teams and agents handle that. But yeah, so it's really just finding comparables and then just kind of working off of that.
Yeah. Talk to me about the landscape now, because obviously the salary cap has typically gone up year after year after year after year as the NFL makes more and more money, but we're in this COVID world where, revenues are down. There's, a relative lack of fans in the stands. What's the salary cap going to do, and how much is that going to impact everything?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest misconceptions about the salary cap in a general sense is folks thinking that, it's a 1 year window, or that you have to fit under the, the 1 year cap, and that's what you're working with. And obviously you have to be cap compliant, but it's really the full, or 95% of current year. And then you can borrow money from, 4 years down the line by pushing money down the line, stuff like that. So
we call that the
Oh,
Saints.
go ahead.
I said we call that the Saints.
Yes, we call it the Saints and Eagles and void years and all sorts of tricks they use to just house money in the future. And of course, the credit card bill always comes due, as we know with our GameStop shares. But in the short term, you can just kind of roll along and like you said, the cap generally is going to go up about 6% a year, which has been about 10 million in recent years. And then of course, unfortunately now that's not the case. But I think we saw with the Rams trade, with the Goff Stafford trade, that that's a signal that teams, yes, they're obviously going to have to make some maneuvers this offseason. But I think they're generally bullish. I think the 17th regular season game is going to obviously, create an influx of revenue. I think gambling money is going to be another influx of new revenue streams. So, like I said, they're going to look at, okay, we just need to push money into the future and then hope that the cap does spike as we expected.
Let me ask about the Saints specifically here, though, because according to Over the Cap, they are at the moment, and I don't know how real these numbers are, but at the moment, $101 million over the cap, right, for 59 players, which looks like an absurd number. And they've been, this is their credit card being due. Or is it? Is there even a world where the Saints can bring back players, re-sign players, sign a free agent or two, be competitive next year? Or are we looking at a completely new Saints team next year, given the situation that they've been put into?
So this is, obviously I've been doing this forever, but this is the worst situation that I've seen. And I venture to guess it's probably the first time a team has ever been projected to be, $100 million over the cap. This is the credit card bill becoming due. And the whole point the entire time was we have, one of the 5 best quarterbacks to ever play the game in Drew Brees. Why not just continue to build around him and continue to, kind of capitalize on this window we have? They obviously didn't make a Super Bowl or win a Super Bowl, but they were winning, 13 games a year. So they capitalized to some extent. But it's not as drastic as maybe it's presented. Like, they're not going to have to shed the whole roster and tank and go 2-14 next year just to get by. They're going to have to just continue, as they've already been doing, to push a ton of money into the future, on some older players as well. But, Drew coming off the books takes $25 million right away. So already you chop that, in a quarter off of that. I think the one real effect we'll see is I'd be surprised if they can retain Marcus Williams or Trey Hendrickson. I just don't see how that happens. And then I know folks in New Orleans have said, like, no, they're going to be in on Stafford. We heard they didn't even call. And we saw the comments, from Sean Payton yesterday about Jameis Winston. I think it's pretty clear their plan at quarterback is going to have to be another, kind of cheaper deal for Winston. build around him or kind of use the roster around him, they can't really compete on big contracts.
That's the problem with drafting so many good players in the 2017 draft. Like Marcus Williams and Trey Hendrickson are probably the 4th and 5th best players in that draft class, with Alvin Kamara, Ryan Ramczyk, and Marshawn Lattimore. Very difficult to just keep those guys, right? After you have one of the best draft classes probably of all time. Let's talk some of the contract projection stuff that you've worked on. You've used PFF WAR a little bit in that, right? As far as trying to use that as a proxy for what a player is or how the league values him. How much does that factor in to your projections, and how close are the projections compared to what you've seen historically?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So one of the first things I did when I got here, and got access to that glorious WAR data was I really wanted to see, how predictive is our wins above replacement, WAR data as compared to the market. And so with a couple adjustments for age, for draft position, and then looking at, a little bit of injury, stuff like that. Once you adjust some very, objective adjustments that are just kind of, we know control the market to an extent, they're highly accurate. I want to say, basically what I use it to predict is the average per year amount, which of course is not, the end all be all, guarantees and stuff like that obviously matter more to the player, but the way the market is gauged and the way they compare each other is by average per year. So that was kind of the output variable that I wanted from the input of the WAR. We're projecting around 85%, just based on this, 85% of the projections were within 20% of that APY. So, if it's a 10 million APY in reality, we were right around there, 8 to 12 million, with just that projection and nothing else. But then, of course, I'll go back in and say, all right, well, yes, this guy's WAR is this, but he missed, 8 games in this season, so I got to tweak it there. Or another big one, it's referred to as a platform year, which is, the contract year. Obviously, if a guy, stunk 2 years before the contract, but was incredible, the 1 year before the deal, then you got to weight that and kind of take the trajectory into account. But it gives you a great baseline.
So this season in particular, it's a weird free agent group. It's pretty strong at the top. I think there's a lot of very good players, and then it gets weak very quickly. How do you anticipate the money getting shared out? Who's going to get the big money deals? Are the sort of middle class of free agents going to get squeezed out? How do you think the money's going to get divvied up?
So I completely agree with you, and I think it kind of works with what we discussed with the cap. So I agree, it's a little bit top heavy, and then there's some solid players, but not, a lot of guys that jump off the page, especially, those higher paid positions like edge rusher. There's not, a ton of great edges coming on the market. I think the top guys will still get their money, and I do still think that they will be pushing, the ceilings of their respective position markets, or still landing the top 5 or top 10, whatever. Even though, as I mentioned, you generally, adjust with inflation. I think they're going to ignore that for the top paid guys. I then do think that middle tier of kind of older guys, if you're around 30 and if you were, looking for maybe a 3-year deal, kind of in the middle tier, you might just sign a 1-year flyer and try to cash in again the following offseason. So I would say we're going to see a lot of top heavy and minimums, kind of like the Rams approach to, the roster construction, I suppose. But I think every team is going to kind of follow that MO of the top guys are going to get their money. They don't care. And then we might have to pinch some of those mid-tier vets.
Before I want to get into some Dak discussion in a second, but I want to ask you about the Rams too. And I think this might be a daily topic for us, Sam, is the Rams strategy, essentially. And by the way, I broke into the 2-for-1 Drafts podcast, to ask this question in the middle of the episode, just upset the entire episode. They gave a good answer, Austin and Sam. So we have an answer on another PFF podcast. But the question is the Rams strategy. And the rumors that they just don't value first-round picks. It's not even a rumor. They're not going to have one from 2017 to 2023. So what are your thoughts on that? Player versus draft value. Are they making the right move? In theory, not even drafting and in their head mitigating risk by bringing in players that are more known commodities.
Well, you teed this up perfectly. I'm actually in the process of doing an article for it right now. It'll be out on PFF.com probably next week, so keep an eye out for that, folks.
Nice.
And no, I reject the idea. I don't think they even necessarily believe that. I think Les Snead was maybe getting a little bit of help from some friends in the media there. Just that, again, it's not necessarily a bad idea. It's not necessarily like I see the argument that we'll take a sure thing over a potential good first-round pick, and they, of course, think they're going to be picking, 25th or later. But I mean, you just go look anecdotally at the history of some of these deals. Even again, off the top of the head, an easy one, the Jay Cutler trade was the exact same trade. It was 2 first-round picks, a third-round pick, and Kyle Orton for, which, it's a little bit mean to Jared Goff, but for Jay Cutler. So
yeah.
Exact same trade. The Bears then gave him a gigantic extension, which maybe Stafford doesn't get, but I wouldn't be surprised there. And then he was never a top half of the league quarterback. Again, per our wins above replacement. His best Bears season, I think, was 19th, in WAR. So there's no such thing as a sure thing. With players either. And then the component that no one talks about is the surplus value of that rookie contract. So even look at an example from this past year, Stephon Diggs leads the NFL in receptions and receiving yards, has an incredible season, and the Vikings still got a better or equally good receiver on a deal that's worth $10 or $15 million less over the next or per year over the next 3 years. So, again, it's anecdotal, of course. They could have taken Jalen Reagor or somebody else, but
right.
But I reject the idea that it's a sound strategy over the long haul. It's eventually going to catch up to you, but I do recognize that if you have arguably the best defensive player of all time in Aaron Donald, you have Jalen Ramsey, one of the best corners, if not the best corner in the league. The entire offense is under contract. All their weapons are already signed. Then be aggressive, go for a window. Why would you try to carry Jared Goff and add 20th overall pick first rounders to try to get over the hump? Yeah, I get it there, but in general, no. And obviously, we see these trades for edge rushers and safeties and stuff like that, and that's obviously not great business over the long haul.
How do you think that the Dak Prescott Dallas Cowboys thing is going to work its way out, and why has it got to the point it's gotten where there's still no deal done?
I think part of Dallas's negotiating strategy is they like to quote unquote win the negotiation, and I think that's it. I understand wanting to exert control and be the big dog in the negotiating room and all that, but at a certain point, it benefits both parties to just take care of your guy, make sure he's happy, he's comfortable, he's not, worried about getting hurt or anything like that, and he just has a deal that's requisite with his talent and his value, and it just works out for both parties. So I think a little bit of that comes in. I really don't think they think that he's a true franchise quarterback, and they look at their roster and say, well, he's obviously been productive, but we've given him, great offensive line play, great weapons. All of these things. So, and then they also, of course, love to argue, well, look, you're going to be a broadcaster, with Jim Nantz in 5 years, or you're going to be, Kellen Moore, you're going to be the coach of a team. So they think there's other aspects of value that they can kind of leverage in a negotiation, which I think probably worked in the past. But I mean, look, we're in kind of a player empowerment era, and I don't think Dak is really falling for any of those tricks. So that being said, I do still think it works out. The quarterback, they're not in position to draft a guy really. They could try to, trade up, I suppose. But they have this roster now that's, quote unquote win now roster. And they saw how bad it got when they lost Dak. So I do think it's going to work out. I think he's going to settle in around Deshaun Watson's value. The years is the biggest, holding point there. He wants a shorter deal to cash in again. They want a longer deal. Who knows how that works out. But I do think eventually it works out. It's just a matter of, I think the Cowboys need to be, I think they're the ones that need to move.
Yeah, that makes sense. How much do you think is them having that hard line in the sand? You mentioned that, you don't think they 100% buy into the idea that he is this transcendent franchise quarterback. And I think there's pretty good evidence to support that. Independent of them, he isn't and hasn't been at the level of Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, even Deshaun Watson from what we saw from Watson this year. So how much do you think they're actually right to say, look, you're not at this level. Like, we don't want to pay you Deshaun Watson money. We don't want to pay you Patrick Mahomes money because right now you haven't shown us Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes play. And is there a scenario where they say, look, this is your value and we're not going beyond this. And if we need to divorce because of that, that's how it's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to an extent you could argue they're the first team that's kind of, which, we think probably should happen at some point. The first team that realizes, like, these second-tier quarterback contracts, when you're paying, a Derek Carr, a Jimmy Garoppolo, a Kirk Cousins, whatever, when those guys come to the market and they're setting the market and getting the highest contract in the NFL just because they happen to be a top half of the league quarterback, that's hitting free agency and that's the only reason they get this deal, maybe they're pushing back on that and saying, look, we understand that's how it's been. We understand the next guy up, if he's good, generally gets that big deal. But we have a number set at, let's say $35 million per year. And we're not going to go past that because we think you're worth a lot and worth a good chunk, but we don't buy into this notion that the next quarterback up has to get the big deal. But that's kind of how the market's been. So they're in a way they're working against the conventions of, how that position market has been treated. And it's tough. I mean, quarterback, it's tough to nitpick with quarterbacks, right? I mean, they're the most important player in the building, arguably the most important person in the building. So, I see both sides of the argument. I guess it could get to that point. I don't think it will. Because again, the franchise tag would be $37.7 million, which, could take up like a fifth of the cap next year. So, and they already don't have the greatest cap situation. So that, that's kind of a little bit of leverage for him as well. I think it'll get done, but I do agree. I think they have a number in mind that they would not like to cross. And that's where I think the years comes in. I think what they're probably saying is, we'll give you that number if you give us the 5th year. And Dak is saying, I want that number and I want 4 years. And that's where I think the disconnect is.
So Dak's kind of using the Cousins model of, right, shorter contract. Let me hit free agency in 4 years. But also trying to say, let me get Watson money in Mahomes. Like, he's trying to get a lot of money for fewer years, right? So
he has all the leverage and has basically from the outset of this.
But it's a fascinating discussion because we just saw his classmates from 2016, Carson Wentz and Jared Goff, sign big contracts, and their teams have serious buyer's remorse.
That's the silly thing about this is that I think Dallas is right that they should value him at a certain point. They shouldn't want to go beyond that number. Their problem is that the only conclusion to that is having to walk away from Dak. And that's probably something that they don't want to do.
And the only thing is, I always use this point, right? 6, 7, 8 years ago in the NFL, that was scary, right? It was very scary to not have a starting caliber quarterback. Now you have teams saying, Jared Goff is a starting caliber quarterback, but I want better. So you have teams saying, I'm not ready to just settle for a starter. If I have to get Marcus Mariota or Jameis Winston, I can do that. They're available, where those guys weren't available 7 or 8 years ago, I don't think, in the NFL.
I think Dak's good enough, though, to make it scary again. Like, it's different walking away from an Andy Dalton or a Jared Goff. I think Dak is good enough where it puts it back into the scary category of, you know what, technically you're probably right, you should walk away, but there's a lot of capacity to get worse.
I will say, with Breeze going, Big Ben falling apart, with Rivers retiring, Dak is probably he's in that top 10 guy.
Yeah.
Category, right? Top 8 type of quarterback category, right? So got to pay him. This is the last question, Brad. You said Dallas wants to win every negotiation. How do you explain Zeke?
Yeah, well, I guess if you go to Cabo and threaten to hold out, then I think maybe Jerry respects it. Maybe there was an aspect to it of, this guy knows how to drive a hard bargain, and I respect his negotiation style.
I don't want to do it.
I don't know. It's interesting,
but I respect it.
We talk about positional value and all that, and Zeke and Jalen Smith are the ones that were handed, easy extensions, whereas they even let Amari Cooper, reach the tampering window, and per some reports, the Washington football team, I should say, offered him a bigger deal than the one he got from Dallas, and so he then, took a slightly less deal, to stay in Dallas. So it's kind of inexplicable. I obviously don't think they're totally aware of positional value, I suppose. The fact they took him 4th overall in the first place obviously hints that a bit. And that's something that I think we saw finally this past offseason where, Zeke's contract was really only surpassed by McCaffrey. Kamara's APY is $15 million a year, but that's because he has a non-guaranteed $22.4 million salary with a non-guaranteed $2 million roster bonus in 2025, which there's a close to 0% chance he actually hits. So all these guys this year on the market all signed like 12 to 13 million per year deals, with not significant guarantees. You look at Henry, Cook, Mixon, all these guys. So I think the market has adjusted and has corrected. But unfortunately, they were a little late to the party there, and they followed Gurley with Zeke, and then it's kind of been downhill from there.
I love it. Great stuff, Brad. So Brad's, again, new to PFF. You can find him. What's your? Are you at PFF_Brad on Twitter now?
Yep.
Okay, we allowed him.
Official.
The official PFF name. So at PFF_Brad. Check out his work at PFF.com. We'll have him on again, hopefully during free agency and talk more about this after the deals, and we can analyze it and everything. But great stuff, and nice to have a cap expert here at PFF. So thanks, Brad.
Thanks for having me on.